In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Moonveil Samurai build. This is a Samurai build that uses the Moonveil Katana to great effect, and if you've been wondering what to do with your Samurai when you reach level 50, then this build is for you. Before we get into the build itself, though, I want to talk a little bit about the Samurai and why I feel like it splits into two different directions right about this point. On one side, you have the pure Dex build that uses like a katana and bow, and on the other side, you have the Intelligence Hybrid build that uses a staff and something like Moonveil or Meteorite or katanas. In my opinion, Moonveil is better than Meteorite or Blade simply because it has a better weapon art on it. Transient Moonlight is absolutely devastating, which I'm going to show in this video if used properly. And then on the other side, it's a choice between the Uchi Katana and Naga Kiba. And in my opinion, the Naga Kiba wins out there. They have almost identical movesets, but the Naga Kiba has almost double the range, which means that you're going to miss far lefts often. And when you're using something like Unsheath, you're literally going to have way longer range with that swipe. So if you're going to go Dex, it's Naga Kiba early on. If you're going to go Int, it's Moonveil. Choosing between those is going to be up to you. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. For instance, the Moonveil does more damage and it has 2 damage types by default. Moonveil is a longer skill reach than the Naga Kiba, even though the Naga Kiba is a bit longer. The Moonveil has higher bleed buildup. The Moonveil has faster attack speed. The Moonveil can be single-handed with no strength investment. And it uses Somber Stones to upgrade, which are not as hard to get, in my opinion, at this point in the game. The Naga Kiba, on the other hand, has a stronger weapon art in terms of damage than Unsheath, just in terms of damage. I'm not saying it's a better art, but in terms of outright damage, it outperforms Transient Moonlight easily. It has a much longer reach, which is going to make you hit more often. It can be buffed with any Ashivore that you want, for instance, Bloody Slash, which hits like a truck. It can also be buffed with weapon buffs, like Grease. So if you want to put Fire or Lightning on there, or Holy Damage, you can, and it has a cheaper FP cost for Unsheath as well. It's like substantially less, and it uses Smithing Stones, so I don't think it's better having Smithing Stones, but it's a different way to upgrade. Maybe you want to use Smithing Stones for an upgrade because something else uses Somber. It's a good way to make sure that you can split it. So they both have their pros and cons, and I want to make it clear that I think Moonveil is a little bit stronger than Naga Kiba in general, and it comes down to the weapon art Transient Moonlight, even though it does less damage. And in this video, in this build, we're going to take full advantage of that, and you're going to see why throughout the video. That doesn't mean that Naga Kiba isn't strong. You can play a pure Dex Samurai just effectively. It's very, very strong, and using a bow is also really, really good and doesn't cost FP the way a staff costs FP to use, like, you know, Glintstone Pebble or something. So you can also conserve FP very easily playing a pure Dex Samurai. So moving on to the Moonveil Samurai build itself, assuming this is what you chose, the things you're going to need are, of course, Moonveil, which isn't too hard to get. You're going to have to run over into Caelid in order to get that. There's a boss there, a magma worm you need to defeat in order to pick it up. It's not too hard of a fight. Might take you a few times. You can always summon there if you need to. But it's a little bit challenging, but it's not super hard. Once you have Moonveil, the other things that you're going to want are Meteorite Staff. This is also located in Caelid. You can just run in and pick this up off a corpse. Literally don't have to kill anything to get it. So you're going to just do a little Caelid run when you're, you know, I don't know, level 40-ish, 45-ish, maybe in that 50-ish range, in order to defeat Magma Worm. But that's probably about the point you're going to spec into this. You might want to respec at Renala after you've defeated her into this if you're playing a Dex Samurai, and this is something you want to do. Besides those two things, the talismans that you're going to want for this build are Radagon Icon, Assassin Cerulean Dagger, and Carrion Filigreed Crest. Of these 3 talismans, Radagon Icon is probably the flex, meaning that you can put something else there, like the Turtle Talisman, or you can put Erdtree's Favor. Anything you can put there you want if you don't like that. But the reason I use this one is for Carrion Greatsword. It's simply too hard to get off, in my opinion, to use if you do not have this. And it also makes your Glintstone Pebble fire a bit faster, as well as your Loretta's Great Bow. So it's just good all around in a lot of situations, and it's not bad to have. But if you want to replace one, that's the one to replace. The Assassin Cerulean Dagger gives you 15 FP back every time you do a critical strike. This is any backstab or off a parry. You're not really going to be doing parries with this build. Or when you stagger an enemy and you critical strike them, you get 15 FP back. This is very, very important for this build because we're using Carrion Filigreed Crest, which reduces the skill cost of your Transient Moonlight by 25%, which means that you're going to use this ability for 15 FP instead of 20, and Cerulean Assassin's Dagger gives you 15 back when you get a crit. When you use the R2 attack of Transient Moonlight, you stagger enemies generally when 1 attack. Most regular enemies will stagger 1 attack, so if you stagger them and then you critically strike them, you get all the FP back that you used to cast it, meaning you can literally use this on every regular enemy in the game without ever consuming any FP. And even though you won't get all of it back when facing harder enemies, when you stagger them and get a critical strike, you'll get some back, allowing you to perform this many, many times during boss fights or hard encounters without having to chug a pot. And this is really good because you want to play aggressively, and that way you don't have to back away to use a pot and then continue your assault. So holding L2, you can do the regular R1 slash that you would with Unsheath that has a bit longer range and shoots out a blade, but it's really the R2 that we're going to focus on here. And again, you've reduced the cost of this from 20 FP to 15, and you're going to use this liberally. This is going to be your go-to on just about anything. If you can sneak up on something and get a backstab, or sneak up on something and start out with like a thrust attack or a charge R2, and then use this, or just use this outright, you could kill most enemies before they can even get up off the tarmac. So you're going to spam this ability. Like, go up to hard bosses, like even ones that are huge. Just start spamming this. Hit it, roll, hit it, roll, hit it. That thing will be staggered. You'll get a critical strike, and just keep repeating this. You don't even have to learn the mechanics of some boss fights because it's that strong. Okay, since you're using intelligence for this build, it makes sense to have a staff and to cast spells. Why not? You can, so you might as well take advantage of it. And we do. Glintstone Pebble is one of the spells we use liberally. It is great for scenarios where you can't get to enemies, or maybe there's a pack of them and you want to thin them out for approaching them, or maybe something's flying, etc. There's a lot of scenarios where this works well on horseback, so it's just good to have, and it costs very little FP. Carrion Greatsword is fantastic for AoE scenarios, although you'll probably tend to thin things out with Glintstone Pebble before going in with your Transient Moonlight ability and just regaining FP that way. It's more efficient. But nevertheless, Carrion Greatsword is there, and it's very good from horseback as well, so don't be ashamed to use it on horseback if you can. And then the last spell is Loretta's Great Bow. This is excellent for very long range. Sometimes you just need some range because the scenario is going to be very, very difficult without some, and this is very, very good. Talking about stats for this build, if you've been playing a Samurai build thus far and you want to change into a Moonveil Samurai, you're going to probably have to respec at Renala in order to get some intelligence because you start out with a very low amount. However, if you played like a prisoner, you're probably in pretty good shape because you've probably been increasing intelligence all the way, and you just need to increase your dexterity a little bit to meet the minimum requirements for the Moonveil Katana. But essentially, your stat spread should look something like we have on the screen. 25 Vigor is very good for melee. 17 Mind gives you 90 FP. That's 6 strikes with Transient Moonlight before you run out, assuming you don't get any criticals, which is a good whole number since that's exactly 6. Dexterity is 18, which is the minimum for Moonveil, and intelligence is at 28. This not only buffs your spells, so that's going to make your spells more effective. This meets the minimum requirements for Moonveil plus a little bit, and it also meets the minimum requirements for the spells that we use. Carrion Greatsword and Loretta's Great Bow are like 24 and 26 intelligence, so you need to have a little bit more than Moonveil in order to use those. The intelligence doesn't really help your damage too much with Moonveil at this point in the game because the scaling is only C scaling with intelligence, but as you upgrade Moonveil more, you're going to get more and more out of that intelligence, and it's only going to increase your damage from there. One thing I want to note, though, is that if you plan to dual wield, if you're using like a Magic Ash of War Uchi Katana on the left hand, and you're using the Moonveil in your right hand, you're going to need a little bit of endurance or you're going to be fat rolling. So make sure to add a few points in endurance if you plan to dual wield. However, I don't really recommend dual wielding for this because you can just abuse Transient Moonlight, and there's no real need to just attack with katanas. However, it can save you some FP if you can't stagger something easily. But I feel like leaning into Transient Moonlight is actually better than playing dual wield. However, nonetheless, if you want to do it, you can just put a Magic Uchi in your left hand and put Moonveil in your right. This will still allow you to use Transient Moonlight when you want by pressing R2, which is fantastic. Moving forward, you're going to keep increasing your intelligence to meet the requirements for bigger spells and also to increase the damage with Moonveil and your spells. You're going to keep increasing Vigor because you're a melee character and you're going to be getting hit, so that's going to keep you alive. Mind, because that'll increase your FP pool. Again, try and make it in some sort of number, get to some sort of number that is good for the amount of spells that you're using that, you know, divides evenly into it is very good. If you can plan it that way, it's not always possible. And you may want some dexterity to increase your physical damage, but you don't really need it. Just a couple final tips here before I end this video. You can still use a bow with this build if you want, especially if you're upgrading Moonveil with Somber Smithing Stones. That frees up the regular Smithing Stones to upgrade your staff if you're using Meteorite Staff, although you'll probably want to change to like Academy Glintstone Staff later, or Carrion Glintstone Staff if you want to have more damage with Carrion Greatsword. The thing about bows in this game is that they don't scale very well in general off your stats, so you're not really losing out a lot of damage by, you know, removing points from dexterity and putting them into intelligence, at least at this point in the game. But what you want to be on the lookout for is better arrows. You're going to need to find or craft better arrows because the 25 damage arrows you begin the game with is just not going to be enough as you can, go further into the game. So you're going to want to craft either the 55 damage arrows or buy ones like fire arrows or whatever in order to deal the regular damage plus 95 fire damage. That can also save you FP, which you can then use for Moonveil instead of on spells like Glintstone Pebble if you want. Another thing I want to mention is that I'm using the default samurai set here, but you probably want to use a helmet that has intelligence on it that increases your intelligence. There are quite a few in the game. A good one for this build is the imp helmet that drops from those little imps that has kind of like the jade imp looking thing to it. That increases your intelligence and has a lot of resistances on it as well. It's kind of heavy, so you might need a couple of points of endurance if you're using it, but you'll probably want that to further boost your intelligence to further increase your damage. That's it for my Moonveil Samurai build. I'm not sure which build I'm going to do next. I might do the Bloodblade update, or I might do one of the strength-based ones. We'll get around to the mage one again pretty soon, but I haven't decided which one I'm going to do next, but stay tuned. We have a lot more build guides coming.